I'm Susan LeBlanc, and this is Conversations with the Goodman School of Business. And my guest today is Professor Trish Ruebottom.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Professor Ruebottom is a professor of strategy here at the Goodman School of Business, and you've done some really interesting work lately with a couple of co-authors on Wall Street.
Thank you.
And particularly the reforms and regulations that all sort of came out of this whole thing in 2008 that caused everyone to take a deeper look at it. Yeah.
Yes.
So what were some of your findings?
So the big thing we focused on was looking at how the Wall Street executives were positioning themselves. So in terms of understanding why change didn't happen and why the reforms that are needed haven't gone through, we were trying to look at what the executives themselves were doing in the way they spoke about things after the crisis and look at why they were able to maintain their position of power. Because common sense tells us they really shouldn't have been able to maintain that position of power.
And most of them stayed in.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what we found, we looked at the testimony at the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. We looked at media reports where they were talking, speaking on behalf of their banks. And what we found was that even when they were talking about their role in the financial crisis and how they caused the financial crisis, they spoke in such a way as to maintain their own authority. And so by reaffirming their authority, it really undermined their role in causing the crisis. So they talked about their expertise and they talked about their concern for stakeholders while also undermining the expertise and concern for stakeholders that other people, other parties had, such as government and regulatory bodies. And so by doing that, they were really able to position themselves as the only actors able to make decisions on behalf of the financial industry. And so even when talking about their own culpability, they were able to maintain their position of power.
And so to be able to maintain that they are still the ones to be able to make these kind of decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's really interesting. Now I know after 2008, after the financial crisis, there was this huge outcry for reforms.
Yes.
And I think some attempts have been made, but really not much has happened. Is there?
No, and what our research would say is that in order for the reforms to go through, another body needs to be able to claim that authority. And that really hasn't happened. Whether it can happen, there's the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and whether that can take on the authority needed in order to challenge Wall Street executives is really yet to be seen. It's not just that it needs to be given resources and be given the political authority to have a certain sphere of influence, but they really need to be able to challenge the authority of Wall Street. So to challenge their expertise and their concern for stakeholders and build the credibility of the agency as a regulatory body in terms of expertise and concern for stakeholders. So really challenge that back.
Right. So now we understand better what changes need to happen. How can these changes start to take effect? Is it possible?
I think with the election in the U.S., I think that it's yet to be seen what can happen there. Who will be leading the agencies is going to be a big piece of it going forward. To date, nothing has been able to change at the moment, but if independent leadership is able to come into these agencies, and not just independent leadership, because we've seen in the past a lot of times the leaders come from Wall Street.
Right.
As ridiculous as that sounds, they actually do choose the leaders of Wall Street to then become the regulators of Wall Street. So this time around, if someone who's independent, that's sort of the starting place. They need to have that independence.
Right.
But beyond that, they also have to have the ability to challenge the authority. And that's the piece that's really yet to be seen.
Right. So what do voters need to take into consideration? I mean, we know there's the big election happening in the States, but I suppose some of this would be true of voters in any country, but in particular, I guess, right now, the Wall Street was the big issue, than the one that you were looking at.
Right. So when we look at the election going forward, we know Bernie Sanders has been positioning himself as the independent candidate, and definitely compared to the other candidates that are there, both Democratic and Republican, he is independent. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. So, he's talked about how he wouldn't put a Goldman Sachs person in charge of the regulatory bodies, but he hasn't told us who he would put in. And so I think in politics, a lot of that happens, and that's what the lesson that can be learned in any country. Political leaders will discredit their opponents by talking a lot about what they wouldn't do.
Right.
And without knowing who would be put in place and whether they'd be able to challenge that authority, independence is one thing, but it's only that first step. So looking at what the plan is to actually make reform and how to challenge the authority is really critical.
Yes, there is an appetite, I think, in the U.S. for change.
Yeah.
The people want to see some sort of change, but as soon as you start talking regulation and things, it gets a little, I don't know, scary for them, I guess. It's not something they're used to.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at the way the Wall Street executives have positioned it, they made it seem as if they're the only ones capable.
Right.
And it is a very complex system. And when you look at the new financial products that get created, they get more and more complex, which then reinforces this idea that they're the only ones that can tell whether it's a good idea, whether it's safe, and whether it's in the consumer's best interest. And there needs to be somebody independent from them that can come forward and say that it's not a good idea. And they need to be able to do that before it's caused a financial crisis. Consumers themselves need to have trust in another body that's not the Wall Street executives.
Right. So what were some of the key takeaways from your research?
I think if I was to look sort of bigger picture, something that could be applied more broadly, it's really this idea of when we look at people with power, there needs to be a space for counter-narratives. So counter voices that come forward and can challenge. And if you can have that balance, then people with authority aren't granted authority without any sort of challenge.
Right. Well, thank you. I think that's it's a fascinating topic. It's very, very topical with everything that's going on in the world right now. And it's been something that, well, since 2008 really has been right up there. So it's great for you to come in and talk to us about the research. It sounds like it was really fascinating. And is there still more to be done, or are you?
We're looking at it. We're not sure exactly what direction the next piece will take, but definitely there's a lot more to be done.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for watching and tuning in. Be sure to check some of the other Brock podcasts. There's Consider This, which is a research-based podcast that brings a panel of researchers together and talks about all the great research happening here at Brock University. And in the meantime, thank you very much for tuning in, and we hope to see you again soon.